Alright, Mr. Trutna, this is Unit 11, Worksheet DL number 3. Remember, DL stands for Distance Learning. We're going to go over the odd-numbered problems 1, 3, 5, and 7. And for each problem, we're going to solve each equation by completing the square. And then keep in mind that we're not going to allow any decimals as we do this. Okay, so number 1, x squared plus 2x minus 24 is equal to 0. So the first thing that we want to do is you want to take the c value, which is negative 24, and if it's on the same side of the equation as the x squared and the 2x value, you want to move it over to the other side. So we need to add 24 to both sides of the equation here. That would cancel out those 24s, and then we would get a new equation, which would be x squared plus 2x, and then leave a little gap where the 24 used to be, the minus 24 used to be, and that's going to be equal to 24. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we are going to complete the square for this equation right here. So essentially what we're going to do is we are going to create a new c value so that we end up with what we have termed as a perfect square trinomial. And remember, whatever we put here for my new c value, I have to add to both sides of the equation. So how do I find that new c value? Well, remember what you do is you take the b value, which is positive 2, you divide that by 2, that gives you 1, then you take that result and you square it, and 1 squared is equal to 1, and whatever that result is, you put here for your new c value. So we're going to have a 1 here, and we're going to have a 1 here. Okay, so now my equation becomes x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 24 plus 1. Now my next step will be is I will take this perfect square trinomial, this part right here, x squared plus 2x plus 1, and I'm going to factor it. So I'm going to make my t-chart. I'm going to take my new c value, which is positive 1, and I'm going to put it right here. And then I'm going to write down all the pairs of numbers that multiply to make positive 1. Well, that's 1 and 1. That's it. Then those two numbers will be your factors if they add to make your b value, which is positive 2. And you can see that 1 plus 1 is 2. So that means my two factors are, this factors into x plus 1 and x plus 1, and that's going to be equal to 24 plus 1, which is 25, and this means I have x plus 1 to the second power, and that's going to be equal to 25. Okay, so all of this process that I've done so far is what we call completing the square. Then I'm going to use square roots to solve my answer. So now my next step is I'm going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. That square root symbol, remember, will cancel out that second power, and I'm going to have to move my work up here. So now I would be left with x plus 1, and you could drop the parentheses, is equal to the square root of 25, and the square root of 25 is positive or negative 5. And to continue to solve this, I subtract 1 from each side of the equation. The 1's would cancel out, and that would give me two answers for x. One of my answers would be positive 5 minus 1, which is 4. And my other answer would be negative 5 minus 1, which is negative 6. So in number 1, my answers are x is equal to negative 6, put a comma, 4. That shows us that both of those answers are the answer to number 1. Okay, number 3, x squared plus 18x plus 56 equals 0. We're going to solve this equation by completing the square. So once again, we have this plus 56. So my first move is I have to take the plus 56, which is the c value, and I have to move it to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to minus 56 from both sides of the equation. When those 56's cancel out, I get x squared plus 18x, and then I'm going to leave a gap right here where the 56 was, and that's going to be equal to negative 56. Okay, Then remember, now I'm going to complete the square. So I'm going to create a new c value right here. So I'm going to put a new c value right here. I'm going to add a new c value here, which means I have to add that new c value to both sides of the equation. So how do I create my new c value? Once again, I take my b value, which is 18. I divide it by 2. That gives me 9. I square 9. 9 squared is equal to 81. And that's my new c value. So I'm going to put an 81 in both of these areas here. That's an 81. It looks like an 8, but take my word for it, it's an 81. Okay? 81. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take this, which is a perfect square trinomial, and I'm going to factor it out. All right, so how do I factor it out? Well, remember, if it's a perfect square trinomial and you know the shortcut, you know the factors. But let's go ahead and make the t-chart just to make sure. So I'm going to take the c value, which is 81, and I'm going to write down all the pairs of numbers that multiply to make 81. 1 times 81, 27 times 3, and 9 times 9. Now, which one of those pairs of numbers is my factor? Whoops, I put 18 here, that's 81. It would be whatever adds to make positive 18, my b value. And you can see that's 9 and 9. So therefore, my factors are x plus 9 and x plus 9. And that's going to be equal to whatever negative 56 plus 81 is. And that would be 25. Okay? So now this means I have x plus 9 to the second power. And that's going to be equal to 25. And so now I'm going to solve, so all of this process is what is known as completing the square. So now I'm going to solve this equation by taking the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. That square root symbol would cancel out that power of 2. I'm going to have to move over here again. And now I would be left with, my equation would become x plus 9 is equal to the square root of 25 is positive or negative 5. Okay, continue to solve for x. I would minus 9 from both sides of the equation. When the 9's cancel out, that would give me x is equal to, and once again, I'm going to end up with two answers. One of my answers would be positive 5 minus 9, which is negative 4. My other answer would be negative 5 minus 9, which is negative 14. So I would get x is equal to negative 14, comma, negative 4. Those would be my two answers to number 3. Okay, moving on to number 5. We have x squared minus 2x is equal to 15. Now if you notice, in number 5, the 15 has already been moved over. There's no number to move at the beginning. So my c value is already over here. That's good. Saved me a step. So my next step is I'm going to have x squared minus 2x, and I'm going to have to add a new c value. And remember, whatever I make my new c value to be, I have to add it to both sides. So how do I get that new c value? I take this value right here, my b value, which is negative 2. I divide it by 2. That's negative 1. I square that. That is equal to positive 1, and that's my new c value that I'm going to get. Okay, then I'm going to take a number 5. I'm going to take this perfect square trinomial right here, and by now I think we've done this enough that you guys should see the pattern that's going on. So we know right away that when I factor a perfect square trinomial, I'm going to get the same factors twice. Okay, so what are my factors going to be? Well, it's pretty simple. It's going to be x, and then the number that I put after the x will be whatever this value was after I divided by 2, which was negative 1. So this is going to factor into x minus 1 quantity squared. Okay? If you don't believe me, you could make the t-chart over here. You can make the t-chart with positive 1, and the only two numbers that multiply to make positive 1 are 1 and 1, and they would have to add to make negative 2. And the only way I can make that to work is to make both of those negative 1 and negative 1. So you can see that it's x minus 1 2 times. And then that's going to be equal to 15 plus 1, which is 16. Please don't forget that when you make this new c value here, you also have to add it over here. Okay? I've noticed that in previous worksheets, the biggest mistake students were making is they weren't adding the c value to the right side of the equal sign. So instead of 16, you would have a 15, which is going to throw everything off. Okay, so that's called completing the square. So now I'm going to solve this by the square root method. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. That square root symbol cancels out the power of 2. I would have x minus 1 is equal to, the square root of 16 is positive or negative 4. Okay, then I would continue to solve by adding 1 to both sides of the equation. And then after the 1's cancel out, we would get x is equal to, and once again we're going to get two answers. One of them would be positive 4 plus 1, which is 5. And the other answer would be negative 4 plus 1, which is negative 3. So my two answers would be x is equal to negative 3 and 5. Okay, so there we go with number 5. Number 7, let's do the last one here. So we have x squared plus 16x minus 32 equals negative 7. So here we have a c value that we need to move over to the right side of the equation. So my first step is to add 32 to both sides of the equation. Those 32's would cancel out. My new equation would become x squared plus 16x, leave a space where the minus 32 used to be, and that's going to be equal to 25. Negative 7 plus 32 is 25. Then I'm going to create a new c value right here. Now once again, whatever you put here for your new c value, oop, there's an x right there, sorry, you have to add to the right side of the equation as well. So how do I get that new c value? I take my b value, which is 16, and I go through that process. Divide it by 2, that's 8. Square it, that's 64. So that's my new c value. So I put a 64 here, and once again, don't forget to add your new c value to both sides of the equation. Okay? So now I'm going to take this right here, which is a perfect square trinomial, and I'm going to factor it out. So how do I factor it out? Remember, we're going to get the same factors twice for a perfect square trinomial. It's going to start with x, because that's my only variable, and then what's the number going to be? It's going to be half of 16, which was positive 8. So I'm going to get x plus 8 to the second power, and that's going to be equal to 25 plus 64, which is 89. Okay? So then I'm going to now solve this equation by taking the square root. So I take the square root of both sides of the equation. That square root would cancel out the 2, and then I get x plus 8 is equal to, excuse me. Now here's where we come into a problem. The square root of 89, it's not really a problem, but this is what so I want you to solve this way. So if you notice, the square root of 89, when I clear that out, is equal to a decimal. Okay? And you can see in our instructions, it says, for each problem, solve each equation by completing the square. No decimals allowed. So when you get to the square root of 89, I do not want you to write 9.43. I don't want you to write 9.4. I don't want you to write a decimal. What I want you to do is I want you to write this as a square root, but I want you to simplify the square root if that square root can be simplified. Okay, so the question is, can I simplify 89? Well, let's make a factor tree of 89 and see if it even has a factor tree. And if it doesn't, then we know that 89 is a prime number and you can't simplify it at all. So right now off to the side, you can see that I'm dividing 89 by various numbers to see if anything goes into 89 evenly. Okay, so 89 divided by 8, that's not going to work. 89 divided by 9, that's not going to work. So nothing goes into 89 evenly. So since you can't make a factor tree out of 89, you just have to leave the square root of 89 as square root of 89. Okay, so now I'm going to continue to solve, so I'm going to subtract 8 from each side of the problem. Those 8s would cancel out, and then we would get for an answer x is equal to, now you cannot subtract that 8 from that 89 because that 89 is inside the radical symbol, so it's called a radicand. So you would have to write your answer like this: square root of 89 minus 8. And that would be your answer. Okay? But however, don't forget to put the plus or minus in front because the square root of 89 is actually positive or negative. So that would be the weird answer looking for number 7, but that's how I want you to write it. There we go.